One night, a great fire. The heart of the ancient world will burn forever. Tonight, we will witness the moment when Alexander the Great not only conquered an empire, he became the empire itself. But the price of absolute power will haunt him until the end of his life. In the autumn of 3031 BC, the greatest military minds of the ancient world were gathering on a dusty plain in northern Mesopotamia. This was not just another battle. It was the ultimate clash between East and West, a contest between the rising sun of Macedon and the ancient glory of Persia. For Darius III, this was his final battle. The King of Kings of Persia had assembled the largest army in human history, nearly 250,000 men, drawn from every corner of his vast empire. Scythian cavalry from the steppes, Indian war elephants, Greek mercenaries, and the legendary Persian immortals. His war chest was vast enough to buy an entire kingdom. But on the other side of the plain, Alexander had only 47,000 soldiers, outnumbered 5-1, fighting thousands of miles from home. Logic told him to retreat. Pride told him to negotiate. But Alexander chose to attack. Why does this matter? Because what happened in the next 24 hours would determine whether the world would speak Greek or Persian, whether philosophy or mysticism would shape human thought, whether democracy or theocratic monarchy would rule the future. October 1st, 31 BC. Dawn broke over Gaugamela. The two armies had been maneuvering for days, like chess players arranging their pieces for the final match. He had carefully chosen this battlefield, a flat plain, perfectly suited for his chariots and cavalry. His center was supported by war elephants, the living tanks of the ancient world. His secret weapon, 200 scythed chariots designed to cut through enemy formations like wheat. Alexander's response was sheer genius. He arranged his troops in an oblique formation with the right wing advanced. His secret? He didn't aim to match Darius with brute force. He intended to use the Persian king's massive army against itself. But what made this battle legendary was this: Alexander did not wait for the Persians to attack. At the first light of dawn, he began advancing his right wing at an angle, forcing Darius to react. The battle erupted with earth-shaking violence. Darius unleashed his scythed chariots first, 200 machines of death charging toward the Macedonian lines. But Alexander's men had trained for this. They opened gaps in their formation, letting the chariots pass through, then closed ranks and slaughtered the isolated drivers. What followed was a practical demonstration of military genius. As Darius extended his left wing to counter Alexander's maneuver, a gap opened in the center of the Persian line. Alexander saw the opportunity. Alexander pointed his spear toward the gap in the Persian line, and his elite companion cavalry formed a wedge formation, launching one of the most famous cavalry charges in military history. Their target was Darius himself. The Persian king, standing in his golden chariot, suddenly realized that the young Macedonian conqueror was charging directly at him. This was the third time Darius had faced Alexander in personal combat during his reign. The collision was devastating. Alexander's wedge formation pierced through the Persian guard like a spear through silk. The Persian nobles, who had never faced such ferocious, well-trained violence, crumbled and fled. Darius fled once again. The moment his golden chariot turned away from the battlefield, the heart of Persian resistance vanished. An army that outnumbered the Macedonians, 5-1, began to crumble. But here came the twist that made this battle truly extraordinary. Alexander did not immediately pursue Darius. His left flank, under the command of Parmenion, was being overwhelmed by Persian cavalry. In a terrifying moment, the battle could still have swung either way. Alexander made a choice that defined his character. He gave up personal glory to save his army. He turned his cavalry and charged toward the Persian horsemen threatening his flank. It was the decision of a true commander, not merely a warrior. After the Macedonian left flank stabilized, the entire Persian army completely collapsed. The largest battle in ancient history ended with Alexander's complete victory. The victory at Gaugamela opened the door to the heart of Persia. The great cities of the empire surrendered one after another. Babylon fell without a fight. The priests of Marduk welcomed Alexander as a liberator. In Susa, Alexander seized the royal treasury, 50,000 talents of gold and silver. This was more than the entire wealth of all Greece combined. But this was only the appetizer. The true prize was Persepolis, the ceremonial capital of the Persian Empire. For 2 centuries, this city had been a symbol of Persian power. Its palaces held the accumulated wealth of a continent. But where was Darius? The great king was fleeing east, hoping to reach the satrapies beyond the Zagros Mountains. Accompanying him were the last remnants of the Persian resistance and a problem that would soon turn deadly. Among Darius's entourage was Bessus, the satrap of Bactria. This man had watched his king lose again and again to a 25-year-old Macedonian. Bessus was beginning to think Persia needed new leadership. Here's something most people don't know. Darius III was not a weak king. He was actually quite capable. He stabilized the Persian throne and demonstrated bravery in battle. Unfortunately, he had the misfortune of facing one of the greatest military geniuses in human history. And now, this last king of Persia was about to face an enemy even more deadly than Alexander's betrayal from within. January 30 BC, Alexander triumphantly entered Persepolis, but what he discovered there changed everything. In the royal palace, he found something that enraged him: carvings and inscriptions celebrating Persia's victories over the Greeks, images of Greek cities in flames. Tributes from defeated Greek city-states. For Alexander, this was more than just conquest, it was personal. However, Alexander was also pragmatic. He needed to win the support of the Persian nobility, so he held a grand banquet in Xerxes' throne room. Wine flowed freely. For the first time, Persian and Macedonian nobles drank together. Among the guests was the famous Greek courtesan Thais from Athens. As the alcohol took effect, Thais rose and delivered an impassioned speech, suggesting that the Persians should be given a taste of what they had inflicted upon Athens. The room erupted in cheers. Someone handed Alexander a torch. In that moment, intoxicated by both wine and the headiness of absolute power, Alexander made a decision that would haunt him forever. He set fire to Xerxes' palace, the king who had burned Athens 150 years earlier. What began as symbolic vengeance soon turned into an inferno. The greatest architectural achievement of the Persian Empire burned throughout the night. 2 centuries' worth of accumulated art, literature, and cultural treasures were reduced to ashes. Alexander has just committed one of the greatest acts of cultural destruction in history. But was it revenge or an accident? Even Alexander's own historians disagreed. Some say it was a planned retaliation for the burning of Athens. Others claim it was a drunken mistake that Alexander immediately regretted. The truth died with him. In any case, this great fire became a turning point. From this moment on, Alexander was no longer merely the conqueror of Greece. He began to emerge as the ruler of the East. As Persepolis burned, Darius continued his desperate flight eastward. But his own nobles had lost patience with the defeated king. The whispers of rebellion grew louder with each passing day. Bessus and his conspirators saw opportunity in the disaster. If they eliminated Darius and surrendered to Alexander, perhaps they could preserve their own positions. Perhaps they could even gain the favor of the new Persian ruler. The moment came near the Caspian Gates. As Alexander's pursuit drew closer, Bessus made his move. In an act of brutal betrayal, the last king of the Achaemenid Empire was bound and arrested by his own generals. Alexander was closing in. His cavalry rode day and night, pushing their horses to exhaustion. The greatest manhunt in ancient history was reaching its climax. But Bessus panicked. As Alexander's scouts appeared on the horizon, the conspirators made a fatal decision. Instead of handing over their king alive, they murdered him, stabbing Darius III to death and leaving his body by the roadside. When Alexander discovered the body, he did something unexpected. He covered Darius with his own cloak and ordered a royal funeral. Why? Because Darius was a king, and kings, even enemy kings, deserve respect. The psychology here is quite fascinating. Alexander needed Darius alive. A living defeated king could legitimize Alexander's rule over Persia. A murdered king would only make Alexander another conqueror, not a legitimate successor. But history cannot be rewritten. The Achaemenid Empire has come to an end, and a new era is about to begin. With the death of Darius, Alexander faced a critical choice. He could rule Persia as a foreign conqueror, or he could become Persian. Alexander chose the latter, a decision that would divide his own followers. He adopted Persian court dress, Persian rituals, and even the Persian custom of proskinesis, the act of bowing before the king. To his Macedonian veterans, it seemed as though their young leader was going native. But Alexander understood something his generals did not. You cannot rule an empire of 50 million people with 50,000 foreigners. He needed the cooperation of the Persians, and cooperation required respect for Persian traditions. Nevertheless, tensions were escalating. His Macedonian officers saw their king changing, becoming something they no longer recognized. They had followed him to the edge of the world, but had they lost him in the process? The answer came when Alexander made an announcement that stunned everyone. The conquest was not over. Despite ruling the largest empire in human history, he wanted to push further east, to India, to the edge of the world. Why? Some say it was ambition. Others claim it was divine madness. But perhaps it was simpler. Alexander tasted absolute power, like a drug, and he could never get enough. This decision will lead him to the ultimate test of his fate. In distant India, he will encounter resistance even more tenacious than that of the Persian Empire. Standing on the ruins of the Persian Empire, Alexander accomplished what no one in history had achieved. By the age of 25, he ruled from Egypt to India, from the Black Sea to the Persian Gulf. He was literally the king of the world. But here the story takes a truly tragic turn. For Alexander learned what every conqueror eventually discovers: there is a difference between seizing an empire and maintaining one. His soldiers were exhausted, homesick, and increasingly resentful of the king's transformation. His generals were conspiring. His new Persian subjects were still deciding whether to accept or resist their Macedonian ruler. And Alexander? He was about to lead his war-weary army into the unknown territories beyond the Hindu Kush. He conquered the Persian Empire, but lost something far more precious. He lost himself. The great fire that consumed Persepolis was more than just an act of vengeance. It was a symbol. The old world was burning, and from its ashes, Alexander was creating something entirely new. But was it worth the cost? History will remember this moment, not as the triumph of one man, but as the moment when civilizations collided, creating the world as we know it today. Alexander conquered an empire, but in doing so, he unleashed forces that would forever reshape human civilization. The heart of the empire has been captured, but the cost of that victory will echo through history, reminding us that even the greatest conquerors are ultimately conquered by their own ambition. Ahead lies the mysterious land of India, where the final glory and tragedy of this conqueror's life will unfold.